When I was 16 years old, my life changed drastically. I was a cheerleader back then, was into sports, most things that normal 16-year-old girls do. And on Thanksgiving Day of 1988, a drunk driver was driving the wrong way on the interstate and hit my family's car head on. The vehicle we were in flipped and caught on fire. From that, I sustained severe leg injuries to my right leg and went to the hospital. They tried different surgeries. Long and short was 9 operations of the doctors trying to salvage what I had left of a leg. And we were up with the decision of, do we amputate the leg or do we not? And I really, even at 16, had a peace that I knew everything would be okay if that was the choice, so we went forward with that. And December 19th of 1988, my right leg was amputated. And then the real work began of 16 years old, boys are important, sports are important, looks are important. You're really defining who you are, your self-identity, and I just struggled with what was that going to look like for me now, missing a leg? How is that going to change my life, and would anybody ever date me, let alone marry me? My parents had a great support system for me. They were constantly reminding me of who I was, and it was the inside that mattered. And you know what, even in Scripture, in Psalms 139, God promises that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. We're made in His image. I think we limit that to certain aspects of maybe what we look like or our life's purpose or things that we're going through. And I don't think I really took that Scripture to heart. I did enter back into cheerleading, but there were always exceptions. Prosthetics back in 1988 were a little more archaic. I had to wear like a belt outside of my clothing with this big contraption, and it just was a really difficult time to try to figure out who I was as an amputee. And even to this day, probably in my mid-30s, I tried to get my identity through even my husband or my kids, and God really got a hold of me, and I began to sink into the Scripture that I am fearfully and wonderfully made, not just from my parents' teaching and the people around me, but I really began to understand what I was created for. At night when I get up to go to the restroom, I don't sleep in my leg, so I crawl to the bathroom, or in the morning I crawl to the shower, and I have to constantly remind myself, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And so I know as a society we struggle with our physical image, whether you're a boy, a girl, a man, a woman, whatever age category, whatever lifestyle you fall into. When we look in the mirror, we see something. Do we see what Jesus sees though, or do we see what we think the world wants us to be? So I just really dive in and say, mine happens to be a physical handicap. This, they've done a great job with. Prosthetics, come a long way. This is what, when I look in a full-length mirror, that I look at. But I know that's not what God sees. God sees that there's a plan and a purpose, and you're beautiful, and you're my daughter, and I just really challenge us to dive into that and figure out what your handicap is. Is it emotional? Is it physical? Are you really clinging that Jesus thinks you're fearfully and wonderfully made? Or is it just something that you hear someone taught you? Is it a scripture that you memorized at some time and you've tucked it back in? Really pull that out and start to meditate and understand that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Look at yourself the way Christ sees you.